Imagine working tirelessly day in, day out, only to find yourself in a deeper financial hole than when you started. Welcome to the world of debt bondage. This modern form of slavery is a global phenomenon, ensnaring millions in its cruel grip. Debt bondage is a cycle where individuals are compelled to work off their debts, often with interest rates so high that the principal sum becomes impossible to pay off. From bustling cities to remote villages, this invisible chain of debt envelops its victims, stripping them of their freedom. Debtors are left with no choice but to toil under harsh conditions, their autonomy eroded by the weight of their financial obligations. This exploitative practice perpetuates the cycle of servitude, sometimes even passed down to future generations. Vulnerable and trapped, these individuals are often left without adequate legal protections. Such is the grim reality of debt bondage, a modern incarnation of slavery that remains largely invisible. But how does debt lead to forced labor, you ask? It's a vicious cycle indeed. This cycle begins when individuals, often the most vulnerable, borrow money under terms that are far from fair. These exploitative terms are usually characterized by exorbitant interest rates, making repayment almost impossible. But the debt doesn't just stand still. It grows, and with it grows the desperation of those ensnared. To repay these escalating debts, individuals are coerced into working under harsh conditions, sometimes under the watchful eye of those they owe. The wages they earn are often meager, barely enough to survive, let alone chip away at the mountain of debt they're under. The cruel irony is that while they work tirelessly to pay off their debts, the interest keeps piling up, turning a molehill into a mountain. The debtors are trapped, unable to escape, chained by their own financial obligations. This endless cycle of work and debt, my friends, is a form of forced labor, a modern-day slavery. The chains of debt bondage do not just bind the debtor, they reach far and wide, affecting entire families and even generations. This relentless cycle of debt bondage doesn't stop at the individual. It has an insidious ability to seep into the lives of children and grandchildren, perpetuating a cycle of exploitation and servitude. Imagine a life where your birthright is a debt, a chain you're born into, a burden you never asked for. This is the grim reality of intergenerational debt bondage. Now, let's delve into the vulnerability of those ensnared in this exploitative practice. Individuals in debt bondage often find themselves targets for other forms of exploitation, including human trafficking. Their desperate circumstances make them easy prey for those looking to exploit their plight, exacerbating their suffering and further robbing them of their freedom. But what about the law? Surely there's some legal protection for those in debt bondage. Unfortunately, legal protections for these individuals are often inadequate, leaving them without recourse. This lack of protection allows for the perpetuation of exploitative practices, often in broad daylight, without fear of consequences. The bleak picture painted here is not to instill fear, but to shed light on the harsh reality of debt bondage. These invisible chains of debt are more than just financial burdens. They are shackles that strip people of their dignity, freedom, and basic human rights. A life of servitude, vulnerability, and exploitation. That's the harsh reality for those trapped in debt bondage. So, how do we break these invisible chains that bind millions across the globe? It's time to delve into the possible solutions to this pressing issue. A good starting point would be to impose stricter regulations on lending practices. This would prevent predatory lenders from taking advantage of vulnerable individuals, trapping them in a cycle of debt they can't escape. Next, we need to address the issue of fair wages. If individuals are paid a living wage, they're less likely to fall into debt in the first place. This is a fundamental step towards ensuring that people can live with dignity and financial security. What's more, we need to bolster legal protections for those in debt bondage. This would mean strengthening laws to punish those who exploit others and provide recourse for victims. This is not just about justice, it's about human rights, and it's an area where we can all play a part by lobbying for change. Lastly, but certainly not least, we need to raise awareness about this issue. Support organizations that are tackling debt bondage head-on. They need our help, and every little bit makes a difference. Let's not forget that these are not just statistics, these are human lives. When we talk about debt, we're talking about freedom, dignity, and the right to live without oppression. Remember, knowledge is power. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you for joining us today on this journey of understanding.